Look at this. Swimming slowly across the emerald surface of a lake in the southwest of England, a beaver, as we glimpsed it just a few moments ago. What a simply fantastic way to start this episode of Springwatch. A beautiful beaver to start the programme. Hello and welcome to Springwatch 2020. A very different series this year for obvious reasons. We're all adhering very strictly to the government guidelines. So I'm down here in Hampshire, pretty much on my lonesome. Got 2 cameramen, 2 engineers, and that's it here. Of course, the other parts of the presenting team are spread all across the UK. Yolo Williams is up in Mid Wales. Gillian is down in the West Country, and I'm very pleased to say that this week we're joined by Gordon Buchanan, who's up on the banks of Lake Menteith in Scotland, where he's encountering some absolutely fantastic wildlife. Now, I was taking my little daily walk out with the poodles in the woods today, and I noticed that the honeysuckle had come into flower. It's been one of the benefits of this lockdown, exploring my local patch and keeping an eye on everything that's been happening. And of course, honeysuckle is interesting because white admiral butterflies lay their eggs on it. Hazel dormice use the bark from it to make their winter nest. But you know, sometimes it's not about the facts, it's about just engaging with that nature. God, that smells so good. But you know what's even better? If you catch the flowers when they've just opened and you pluck one gently out like that, sometimes you can see that the nectary at the bottom here has a little bit of yellow fluid in it, and you can put it in your mouth and suck it out, and it's so sweet. And you get that instant hit, a hit of dopamine like we were talking about last night. The simple beauty of nature can fire you up. And that connection is so important. It's been so important during this lockdown when lots of people have been going out, meeting their natural neighbours in a way that they never have before. Lots, for instance, have been meeting their robins. Now, robins are very trusting little birds. They rely on other animals, principally grazing animals, to disturb food on the woodland floor. So they're not, too put off by coming to humans, particularly when you're offering them tasty mealworms like this. But it's that feeling, isn't it, of a tiny, almost weightless little bird landing on your hand, all filmed on mobile phones. Of course, these days they have slow-mo features. Look at this one. This one's particularly good. Judith in Herefordshire peeped out of her bedroom window, heard a noise, and on the garage roof, 2 tawny owl chicks. But my favourite is probably this one. Steve from Derbyshire, a key worker in a quarry, noticed this vole underneath a bird feeder and thought that he would try and tame it. And the little vole came out and is taking the food. And those moments are so magical. It's when you're lying there waiting for the vole, it doesn't turn up, and you're thinking, do I give it another minute? I've invested 5 or 10 or 15. Then the vole arrives and you stop breathing and your heart misses a beat and you feed it, and then it goes back in the bushes and it's all over as if it was just a dream. And it's those sorts of things can be so formative, particularly at the moment when so many people have been struggling under lockdown. You know, people with mental health issues, people who are lonely, people with dementia, now people who are anxious or maybe just bored. Well, I've got a tip for you. If you've got a robin anywhere near you, why not try and train it to come and land on the palm of your hand? For the price of a mealworm, that might transform your life, and I guarantee that it would absolutely improve it. Fantastic stuff. Got a great show coming up tonight, actually. How do seashells lay down the patterns of their shell? A species which hasn't bred in the UK for 600 years, and Britain's largest avian predator in action. How can you resist? Better stay with us. Of course, we are up to all of our usual tricks when it comes to our live cameras. In the Memdip Hills, we've got a number of cameras on a range of nests, and you can see some of them here. Let's take a look at our jackdaws. There were 2 young in the nest, and it's been a busy nest with lots of shenanigans going on. Now, they are pretty close to fledging. The adults are coming and now feeding them from the nest hole. The youngsters can reach up and take the food there. Here's a view from inside the nest, and you can see they're pretty big enough to find their own food if it's foolish enough to fly through the entrance hole. A crane fly here. But it's not the crane fly I want to show you. Take a look at this. It's the bird's eye, a beautiful baby blue colour. Now, they will go to a muddy brown, and eventually, after a couple of years, they'll go to a bright white pupil. And that's quite unusual amongst the corvids. Here you can see one of the adults perched outside, and those eyes are really striking. But why? In nature, every form has to have a function. Well, look, here's our nest box. If we turn the lighting down to more natural levels, look how bright that eye shows up. And eyes are used as a means of threatening potential predators or adversaries. And look again here, one of the adults. So if a stranger prospecting for its own nest flies up and peers in and sees that bright white adult eye, it knows not to enter. Animals don't want to fight. They certainly don't want to fight in a confined space like a hollow tree. So it makes sense for those adults to be able to dissuade any intruders from coming in, and they probably do that by having these bright white eyes. Let's go to them live now so that we can see those chicks inside the nest. And here they are. They're striking little birds, jackdaws. I have to say, I have a real soft spot for them. Really smart. Smart looking and smart when it comes to intelligence too. I love a jackdaw. Yolo, down there in Wales, you've got to be a fan of jackdaws as well, surely. They're really, really smart birds.
Well, we've retreated into the woodshed here. No jackdaws in here, Chris, but we're here, of course, because it's rained for most of the day. I'm pleased to say that it is starting to clear up now, thankfully. But we have been keeping our eyes on the live nests all weekend, and the reed buntings have been particularly busy. Let's have a look at the nest now. You'll see here it is in amongst the tall vegetation. It's empty at the moment, but we know that the female laid 4 eggs in there initially. 2 of those eggs hatched, and at the weekend she came to remove the 2 remaining eggs. And the reason for doing this, of course, they've been festering in there. If they broke, then they're a health risk to those other 2 youngsters. The male, the handsome male, bringing in invertebrate prey for the youngsters. And at first, we believed one chick is a lot older, a lot bigger than the other one. We believed that maybe it was getting the glut of the food. And when we looked at this and counted the number of times each chick was fed, we found actually that they were both being fed really well. On Sunday at midday, the eldest chick, well, it didn't quite fledge, it more semi-fledged, as Michaela would say. It dived into the surrounding vegetation. It was fed by the female. The remaining young chick was fed mainly now by the male, bringing in a beak full of invertebrates yet again. And then yesterday, just at dawn, the young chick, well, again, not quite fledged. It wasn't very elegant, was it? Semi-fledged, bottom first out there. We also have a new nest for you now, so let's go over live and have a look at it. It's a robin's nest. What do you think, Gillian?
Yes, it's amazing. This is introducing a new nest, our robin nest. It's a lovely family. You can see there the chicks are on their own, very fuzzy looking. We've seen so much activity around this nest. Let's look at what we saw earlier. Now, the adult return with a beak full of insects straight to that nest, and those mouths wide open. You can see there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hungry mouths to feed. Very, very busy adults provisioning that nest. So all 5 chicks doing well. We also have this nest. This is a dunnock. Subtle plumage, but a beautiful bird. Lovely song. 5 eggs were laid, 4 hatched. Sadly, 1 died, but the 3 chicks are doing well now. And then we've also got this nest. This is a chaffinch nest. And you can see there, that's the female feeding the chicks. They're quite big. Now let's take a look at them live and see what's going on in that den. And there you can see the chicks are actually really big. They're practically overgrowing that nest. So they are close to fledging, and you can keep up with all of this action, all our nest cameras. We're streaming this 24/7 on our digital platforms, on our website. And you can also catch up with Hannah Stitfall at 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. She does a live stream. And Chris and Megan out to lunch at midday, also on the live stream. So loads and loads of ways to keep up with those nest cameras up there at our Mendip hub. Of course, I'm here in Cornwall, and earlier in the year, I took the opportunity to get down to my local beach to do one of my favorite things, rock pooling. And there, I found some creatures that have a really fascinating way of staying alive. Around our coastline, as the ocean meets the land, millions of tiny and turbulent whirls are created and lost every day. Rock pools are transformed with the coming and going of the tide. And when you first look at them, it doesn't look like there's a whole lot going on. But when you're still and you give it time and you let things settle, a whole cast of animals start to reveal themselves. These beautiful miniature worlds are full of life. But these seemingly peaceful pools are difficult places to live. When the tide goes out, anything living in here is trapped and marooned in this rock pool. And that means predators and their prey. So of course, some are vulnerable. Each rock pool is its own cloak and dagger kingdom. So the inhabitants have come up with creative and surprising solutions. All with a common theme: if you can't run, hide. We're all familiar with cuttlefish that can change their colors in the blink of an eye, not just their colors, but even their patterns. However, there are other masters of camouflage in the sea. And look, in this jar, it's going to take a little bit of an effort to find them because they really live up to their name. They're called chameleon prawns. If you look over here, there's one that is a bright green, perfectly matched to the green seaweed in there. While, bearing in mind, they're all the same species, there's one here that's perfectly matched to the red seaweed there. And they can do this, they'll change the color to match their background. It can take up to 2 weeks, but they can go back and forth and they can perceive what background they're on and change their color, just like chameleons. Every rock pool resident has its own method of becoming a master of camouflage. And the next inhabitant is no exception, a Risso's crab. When you look carefully, you can see it's got this gorgeous mottled pattern there. And that helps to camouflage it against this background. But if you look at those hind legs especially, they're really, really hairy. And that, again, breaks up its outline. And once it sinks into this kind of seaweed over here, it really is hard to spot. Blending in is key to survival. And while the Risso's crab hides itself in the rocks and sand, a rare rock pool resident, Leach's spider crab, cleverly covers itself in seaweed, hiding among the stinging tentacles of snake-lock anemones, keeping them safe from harm. But one of the things you don't have to work too hard to find on this sort of rock pool and reef are these top shells. They're literally everywhere, along with the limpets and the barnacles. But every now and again, you come across one that's moving a little bit too quickly, and that's a telltale sign that you have found yourself one of these, a hermit crab. There's several species of hermit crab, and what they do is they're real specialists in finding empty shells in which to make a home. And of course, that means they're protected from all sorts of predators. Hermit crabs are known to pick the shells that blend into their environment best. But the next creature I find is so camouflaged that it might easily be mistaken for a piece of floating seaweed. This is one of my absolute favorite rock pool finds. I'm just going to pull it out for a brief moment. This is the gorgeous pipefish. They're very, very similar to seahorses. They're actually related to them. They have that same long snout and gorgeous, delicate dorsal fin that they use to move around. But they're not really strong swimmers. So what they do in order to stay attached is they use their prehensile tails and they hook them around any of the seaweed they can find. They, I think, are real masters of camouflage. Rock Rock pools are absolutely amazing habitats. They're like little mini dramas that are revealed with each turn of the tide. And in them, creatures that have incredible adaptations for life in these extreme environments. It's amazing what you can notice if you just take the time. The only thing that's going to shimmy me along is the incoming tide.
I love a bit of rock pooling. You never know what you're going to find. You always find something new. What about those chameleon prawns? Not only new, I've never seen those before, but exquisitely beautiful.
So beautiful. What a surprise to find there.
Yeah, amazing.
Brilliant stuff.
We always loved a bit of rock pooling, didn't we?
We do. It's always great, isn't it? You go out and you scour the beach and you come home, inevitably, with pockets of shells. I mean, I know I do. You always have competitions, don't you? Who can find the most beautiful shell on the beach? But it's the diversity of shapes, it's the diversity of colours and patterns too that you can find that really make it interesting. We always appreciate their beauty, but do we ever really question exactly why they are patterned and why they are so colourful? Now, with shells, we are starting to understand more about their coloration, and there's three main ways. One is cryptic coloration. The shells are more camouflaged in their environment. They blend in better. A second strategy is that some are light and some are dark, and that helps for thermoregulation. The light ones reflecting heat, whereas the dark individuals retain that heat. And the third one is all about how they derive their colour from what they eat. Which is pretty interesting stuff. But we're trying to figure out, why are they patterned? Well, we don't really understand why, but we're very much closer to figuring out how. And that's because scientists have been working out exactly how they create these patterns, and we think they're able to sense the pigmentation on the shell, which essentially acts like instructions. It gives them a guide as to what to build next, because they'll be constantly adding to that shell sporadically throughout their lifetime.
So they can sense the pigment that's already laid down in their shell?
Essentially, yeah.
Well, how do they do that?
Well, it's funny you should ask that, Chris. I happen to have a cross-section of a snail right here just for you.
You've always got one of those tucked away, haven't you?
I
Whenever I
do.
come into your room, you're working on a cross-section of a
Honestly,
snail.
you never know what I've got up my sleeve. But
I wouldn't want to look.
No, I don't think you did. You can see what, of course, the anatomy of the snail is here, but what's most interesting is what is missing. Now, the snail doesn't have a brain. Instead, what it has is these nerves called the ganglia, which is represented in blue. Now, it goes all throughout the foot here, but it goes all the way up to the mantle, where it's concentrated in this area, and this is the mantle here. The mantle is responsible for producing this calcium carbonate, which is, of course, what creates the shell, but it's also responsible for producing pigmentation. And what we believe now is that the ganglia is able to sense, even taste, the pigment that has been laid there before. So it's able then to know what to do next.
And I'm going to demonstrate this with some cakes that I baked earlier.
You baked cakes?
Yeah, right. Okay. So look, we've got different bits of cake here. So the thing is, I'm the snail, the mollusk, okay, and I'm tasting the pigment here. And I'm thinking, okay, a little bit of strawberry. What I need now is a bit of lime to lay on top of that. So what you're saying is that then the snail puts the lime down.
Yeah.
These are vegan, by the way.
Have a nibble again.
Have another little nibble and thinks, what I probably need now is a bit of sort of chocolate or whatever it is. Puts a bit of that down, like that. Has another nibble. And then it carries on doing this all the way through until it lays down the, until it lays down a whole tier of different colours like this.
Stole my cake. Yeah, but that's exactly what they're doing. It acts as a guide for them to be able to better understand what to produce next, which is interesting stuff. And Helen Scales has written a book about the theory of this and how they're able to lay out and taste that pigment, so they're able to understand more about their own patterns, which I find mind-blowing.
But that would also mean that they would have to remember which pigments were already there.
Essentially, these patterns act as loose memory maps, really, don't they?
Extraordinary, isn't it?
Yeah.
Extraordinary
Really
stuff.
cool.
Our oceans, as you know, are not in the best of condition. Plastic waste is a massive issue. Acidification is another. Eutrophication, too much nutrients going into parts of our ocean, are also a problem. But so is noise. Noise made by us. All of the boat traffic across the world is obviously generating an enormous amount of sound pollution beneath the surface. And we know that animals are particularly sensitive to this, particularly those that are using it to communicate, to find their food, things like cetaceans. And here, look, very sadly, the side of this humpback whale has even been wounded by a propeller. Sonar. Explosions beneath the surface are implicated when it comes to cetaceans beaching and stranding. So sound pollution is a real problem, but it's not just things like cetaceans and seals, mammals, it's crustaceans too.
Yeah, and we didn't really realise this until now. Scientists from the University of Exeter have been looking at the relationship between noise pollution and the common shore crab. Now, these young crabs rely very much on camouflage to evade predation, and they're able to change the colour of their shells over time to match their environment. But of course, that's incredibly energetically costly, and it's all controlled by hormones. So these hormone changes actually activate these specialised pigmentation cells on the shell. But what the research has sadly found is that in environments where there is high ship noise, these animals, due to stress, are unable to change their colour and therefore are more susceptible to predation.
So we got some here, look at this. This is a crab which is very well camouflaged. Well, in fact, it's so well camouflaged, I'm struggling to see it. So let's have a look. Where's the crab? Spot the crab. There it is, there it is. So you'd find it very hard if you were a predator to spot that crab. Presumably that one's living in a pretty healthy, quiet environment. But then we've also seen the results of the scientific work.
Yeah, and it's shocking, really, isn't it? Because you're able to see there, you've got the control where those individuals are not being exposed to any sound, the loud control where they're being exposed to natural sound, and then the ship control as well, which is all about them being exposed to anthropogenic sound. And it is drastic. Yeah. Absolutely drastic.
But it's not just about volume.
No, so they were played natural sound and anthropogenic sound at the same amplitude, the same volume. So it's not about the volume at which it's played, it's about the fact that we're producing man-made sound that they're not accustomed to, they can't deal with, pumping that into the oceans. And now, of course, due to stress, they're spending so much energy on not being on that sound that they're not able to change the colour of their shells, and then of course they're more susceptible to predation too.
What about that? Some pretty fantastic science. And without understanding these subtle yet important phenomena, we can't change our practices. And it's certain that we might have to change those practices. And recently, during lockdown, our seas have obviously been a bit quieter, like most parts of our environment. And I'm pleased to say that some scientists have had special dispensation to go out and look at sound pollution and the impact that it's having on animals. And one of them, Dr. Nathan Merchant, has written an article on our website, and you can find that blog there. Good stuff.
Interesting.
Sublime science to a ridiculously fantastic bird in the hands of the one and only Gordon Buchanan on the side of that lake in Scotland.
Welcome back to the tremendous Trossachs. It's just me, my small crew, a million or two midges and this phenomenal view. What a difference a day makes. Yesterday you couldn't even see Ben Lomond behind me. It's come out of its vanishing act. It's just such a lovely place. I've said it before and I'll continue to say it. The mornings here are blissful. I've been getting up nice and early, about 4 o'clock in the morning. By 4:30, I'm at the edge of the lake. And it is the best time of day. The air quality is phenomenal. The lake was flat calm. And we had all of our regular visitors. But the best thing of all, I think, was that I just had the place entirely to myself and the birds. So there's lots of bird activity, but the most prominent bird activity was with our male osprey. I saw him fly over from the nest and he was fishing in this bay for an hour and a half at 6 in the morning. And he was, I suppose, frustratedly trying to catch a fish. So in the time that I was with him, he made about 20 or 30 aborted stoops. I counted 11 contacts with the water. Some where he just skiffed, some when he went completely under, somersaulting. If you think for that bird who's hungry, he needs to provide fish for him and his female on the nest, he's using up that huge amounts of energy, lifting off from the water, shedding all of that water off of his feathers, and rather dejectedly, he sat up in the tree there for about 40 minutes before he flew off and tried elsewhere. As I said before, this is my first visit to Lake of Menteith, and I was so surprised that there were so many ospreys so close to where I live in Glasgow. But I was even more surprised when another bird of prey that I'm very familiar with put in an appearance on one of my camera traps just round the bend there. So for this clip, you'll have to watch and listen very carefully. So straight off the bat, we've got a sea eagle that flies in and lands in the tree. You see the limb bouncing. Top left, an osprey has spotted it, flies over, starts to call. And the next call that you'll hear after this one is the raspy call of the sea eagle, who's been spotted, and the osprey swoops in and is trying to get rid of that unwanted visitor. Obviously, a bird of that size isn't going to go unnoticed. So, OK, we're in the Trossachs. People that have lived here all their life at Lakeside have never seen a sea eagle until this year. And there was a second one. There was two. So there's a pair breeding in 60 miles in Fife, quite far away. In Cowell, there is another pair 45 miles away. But what I think we are seeing is potentially... So what is a pair of sea eagles doing in the Trossachs? So as we know, the coast of Scotland, that's the stronghold for sea eagles. They first bred successfully on my home island in 1985. There was a subsequent reintroduction on the Fife coast. So what is happening is that these birds have been recolonising the coast of Scotland on the west, on the east, even as far up as Orkney, which is amazing. So what we could be seeing right here is a future breeding pair scoping out a vacant territory. And that is really great, because it's great for them. It's perfect. I call them white-tailed sea eagles, but we're 50 miles in either direction from the sea. Sea eagles need three things. Firstly, most importantly, they need to be free of persecution. Secondly, they need food. I wonder where they'd get that from. And they need suitable trees to nest in and to roost in. So in the Trossachs, they've got a lot of choice. I'm going to make a prediction, and I really hope it comes true, that within 3 to 4 years, there are going to be breeding sea eagles or lake eagles right here, quite possibly in one of the trees that overlook the Lake of Menteith. When it comes to food, a bit like myself, sea eagles aren't that choosy. I'm going to give you a list of a heap of things that I've seen them catch, bring into nests, and other things that I've heard of them bringing into nests and catching. So, feral cat, hedgehog, fox, octopus, mink. There's 170 different types of birds that they bring in, and of course there's fish of all shapes and sizes that they'll catch and bring into their nest and eat on the shore. But the other day, I got the biggest surprise of 2020. Well, maybe not the biggest surprise of 2020, when I managed to film something just over there that may well be an addition to the Sea Eagles menu. I was blown away when I spotted this little roe deer swimming across the lake, and I was gobsmacked when in swooped out of nowhere came this huge sea eagle. Look at the difference between that eagle and the roe deer. It actually swooped in 4 times, and each time I thought, it is going to go for it. It is definitely going to have a go at that. Thankfully for that little roe deer, it made it to the edge of the lake. So the sea eagle is a big bird, you could see that, but how big is it? Chris Carroll here at Lochend knocked us up a sea eagle in about half an hour just before we came on air. It is scale. It's much heavier than a real sea eagle, but this is the 8-foot wingspan of a sea eagle. Matt, the cameraman's having to go backwards to fit it all in. They're a metre tall, so they're a huge bird, but when you compare it in the context of that deer, let's have a look. Courtesy of the wonderful Dave Sexton on the Isle of Mull, we've got a replica sea eagle skull, and courtesy of me wandering through the forest last night after we came off air, I found this little roe deer skull. So could this predator take down this prey? I think when it comes to roe deer, it's all about opportunity, because they're a very secretive little deer, very active at night time, not comfortable when they leave thick cover. So I think it's going to be rare, few and far between the times that a sea eagle would have that opportunity to think about it. But for a roe deer swimming across a lake, on a different day, maybe a different eagle, maybe with a slightly longer opportunity. You know, who knows? What we've got here is some photographs that will give you a comparison with how big a sea eagle is with some familiar birds. So a raven, which I always think ravens are huge. Look at that deer carcass, big bird. A buzzard as well, a little bit smaller than a raven, but sort of, yeah, we kind of regard them as fairly sizable birds, but nothing compared to the mighty brute of a bird. The sea eagle is phenomenal. I'm just gobsmacked every time I see them. I'm blown away by them. They are enormous, simply huge. I've had the pleasure of filming them for many years. I suppose I grew up alongside them on the Isle of Mull. And the thought of them potentially colonising this part of Scotland, I think is really, really wonderful. And the best part of it for me is that Quint Glenn, the fisheries manager here, is actually happy to have them here. He feels that there's enough food for the anglers, enough fish for the anglers, enough fish for the osprey, and enough fish for the white-tailed eagle. So that's just a really beautiful kind of story of people and predators living side by side. Now, this is our moment for mindfulness. You can relax and relish this really wonderful film from North Norfolk, and it was made by Josh Jaggard. It's really lovely. Relax, take it all in.
Josh, what an absolutely beautiful cameo of that river. Stunning stuff. And it's interesting, if you were watching yesterday, we were talking about brain biochemistry and how nature can improve that and thus our mental health. And our guru, Emma Mitchell, said to me, go and sit by water. Just the sound of that water can produce such a calming effect. There's no doubt that many people feel that. That's why we sit alongside streams and just listen to that trickling sound. Super stuff. Yolo, I can imagine that you've sat alongside a few trickling streams on those Welsh hills, contemplating the world in your time.
Yes, I've sat around and listened and watched many a time, Chris, I have to say. Trouble is, if I sit by water now, my age, you know what happens. Well, that hot weather really has come to an end, and come to an end with a vengeance. It was about 12 degrees cooler tonight than it was last night, so, but I do like the warm weather. May was a real scorcher, but it can be very difficult for our wildlife to find water, especially in our gardens. But we know that you've been helping out, and we know because you've sent us in some lovely videos. This one was sent in by Jane Nance Kibble, and it shows starlings, a whole flock of starlings coming to drink in a garden. A lot of juvenile starlings in there, scattering at the last minute. Vicky out in Cheshire. It's not just the drinking, of course, it's the washing as well. It's important that they keep that plumage clean. That allows them their aerial mastery. And Claire Lampard in Kent, goldfinches and blue tits using your small garden pond there. Beautiful birds, stunning birds. But by night, look at this. tawny owl. A tawny owl coming into that same pond. I've got tawny owls near me. I wonder whether they use my pond. Really do. Beautiful. Again, washing the feathers. And of course, hedgehogs. A lot of you I know put out cat food and dog food for hedgehogs. Well, just as important during these dry periods is to put out water for them as well. But well done all of you, a big thank you. Thank you for sending those in, but an even bigger thank you for helping our garden wildlife. Well, I'm lucky here because I live in a very rural part of Mid Wales in Montgomeryshire, and there's a Welsh saying about Montgomeryshire. It goes, Mwynder Maldwyn, and it means the mildness of Montgomeryshire. It refers to the people, yes, but it refers to the landscape as well. There are no rocky outcrops, no hard edges here. It's all rolling hills, river valleys, woodlands, fields and hedgerows. And of course, it's brilliant for wildlife too. This is the ancestral home of the red kite. When they disappeared from everywhere else, they survived in Mid Wales. And many of you have reported decline in swallows. Well, we're doing pretty well for house martins here. The house we're at least 6, maybe as many as 8 nests here. And I love it in the evening when they gather on the wires to chatter and feed. And the commonest bird of prey we have here is a buzzard. Rounded wings and short rounded tail. It's more common than the kestrel and the sparrowhawk up here. And about 2 hours south of me is the River Usk. And our wildlife team down there, well, they took advantage of the last 2 sunny days to film a sand martin colony. And the Usk is a great place for sand martins. They love these muddy banks where they nest. And this, of course, is our smallest martin. It's a migrant. It spends the winter months down in the Sahel, south of the Sahara Desert. The males are the first ones back, and they immediately set about digging out these holes. They'll go in about 60 centimetres, but when they get about halfway, they'll stop. They'll come to the entrance of the hole, start singing, flying around to attract the mate. And once they've done that, then both birds finish digging the hole, a nest chamber, a rudimentary nest of grasses and feathers, and then they start to feed up. She needs to get into condition to lay those eggs. And it's a lovely thing on a summer's evening to sit out and watch and enjoy sand martins. They reckon there are about 100,000 pairs in the UK, and that section of the River Usk is brilliant. Lots of colonies along there. And another bird that shares the same habitat, a more colourful, a more familiar bird, is the kingfisher. Usually, of course, it's just a flash of blue and orange, but our nest finder down there, Steve Roberts, has found us a kingfisher nest. There they go, dashing into the hole, carrying fish in there, so they're obviously feeding chicks. And what you need, of course, if you've got kingfishers, you've got to have a river full of fish. And if we stop it here and bring it back a little bit, you see that they carry the fish into the chicks with the head pointing outwards. They eat the fish head first, so they're making it easier for those chicks to swallow the fish. You'll also notice they go in head first, but they come out backwards. That's because the nest chamber is full of chicks. There's no room to turn around, so they have to reverse out. And when they come out, they dip into the water because in there it must stink. Fish bones, slime, fish scales, so little clean is the order of the day. Fantastic. Just under 5,000 breeding pairs in the UK, and once they leave the nest, if I was to ask you, what do you think is the chief predator of kingfishers? I bet you'd say, well, it's probably a mink maybe, or a fox, or maybe a sparrowhawk. It's not. It's the domestic cat. So if you have a cat, please make sure you attach a bell onto the collar. Now then, no matter where these birds nest, it might be a hole in a bank, it might be in a nest box, it might be in an old building or a nest in a tree. There's an awful lot of maintenance work, and that means that the parents are always busy. Have a look at this. Now, 20 years ago in one corner of Sussex, a couple took a giant leap of faith when they handed over 3,500 acres of their farmland estate to nature. And in doing so, they took their inspiration from our ancestral part. This is what happened next.
The Knepp Estate is a British landscape like no other. A land of wild spaces. A land burgeoning with life. Over the past 2 decades, it's undergone a radical transformation, revealing what happens when farmland is returned to nature. With fields left fallow, thorny scrub soon begins to develop as hedgerows spill out. Songbirds are quick to take advantage of the growing, spreading thickets. Small mammals such as harvest mice find shelter in the dense vegetation. Their presence attracts a host of predators, like elegant red kites. Left unchecked, scrub matures into dense woodland. So large grazing animals are needed to live wild and control the vegetation. In place of the aurochs, the ancient wild ox that once roamed Europe, longhorn cattle now keep areas open and full of light. Swarms of flying insects follow them, adding to Knepp's growing larder. Unrivaled seed dispersers, the cattle unknowingly transport up to 230 species of plants across the landscape with their hooves, fur and dung. Wild ponies travel much further and faster, distributing nutrients as they go. The animals here are free of chemical wormers and parasiticides, making their dung a rich source of nutrients. Dung beetles have returned in their thousands. They feed on the dung and the parasites found in it, which helps to protect grazing animals from disease. Protein-rich beetles attract little owls. In fact, each of the UK's 5 owl species have been recorded at Knepp. To turn the earth, Tamworth pigs were released. As the wild boar did for centuries, their rootling creates new habitats for insects and areas in which wildflowers can flourish. Knepp is revealing how animals can shape their own environment. With all the animals moving freely through the landscape, a patchwork of different habitats has developed. More than 600 invertebrate species can now be found here. And numbers of reptiles and amphibians are booming on the abundance of prey. Knepp is becoming a refuge for many critically endangered species. The purple emperor butterfly has returned, and this site now holds the UK's largest population. With each passing year, new feats in conservation are occurring. This year, 2 pairs of white storks are breeding. Knepp's transformation has been led by the animals and plants that live here. It's now a refuge, for growing populations of rare and endangered species. And it's one of the great landscape experiments of our time.
What an amazing, amazing place that is. I got the chance to visit the Knepp estate last summer. And I've got to say, I mean, it's starting to drizzle here, but back then in that bright sunshine, it took me right back to the East African scrub savanna of my childhood. And I tell you what, it's really worth, however, noting where Knepp is on the map, because it's right here, tucked between sort of Brighton and London. And it's flanked by a motorway, busy A roads. It's right underneath one of the busiest flight paths in the world. And still, because of the habitat that's been created there on the Knepp estate, the wildlife has found it. And one really, really spectacular species that is now making Knepp its home is the white stork. Now, last summer, 24 juvenile birds headed off, set out west on an exploratory flight. They were joined by a few wild flying birds as well, and they headed off all the way down here. They made it to Cornwall, as far as the Lizard Peninsula down here. And I got to see these birds. I was on a beach, on Coverack Beach on the Lizard, along with just lots of holiday makers minding my own business. And we were treated to an amazing fly past of this flock of birds. And people got absolutely excited. They were buzzing. People sent in their photos. People were taking film of it, and it really was amazing because this project, the White Stork Project, which is the project about reintroducing these birds as a breeding bird in the UK, really was also about reconnecting people with wildlife and with nature. And by using these really big, conspicuous, spectacular birds, they hoped that this would happen. And I can tell you for a fact that it really did. People were so excited on that beach and right through Cornwall as we saw them. So with all that excitement and drama, of course, every drama has a backstory. So this is how it played out. Last year on Springwatch, we featured a pair of birds that started nesting on the Knepp estate. Now bear in mind that the last successful breeding record of white storks in the UK was in 1416, that's over 600 years ago. So this really, really was quite spectacular. So this pair, they laid 3 eggs, but sadly, they failed. Now, the eggs failed, it might be that they were infertile, but it's possibly also because the female was just under the average breeding age. We know this because she was ringed as part of the reintroduction program in 2016. The male we don't know so much about. He was not ringed and possibly a wild vagrant. So what happened next? Well, the story doesn't end there because this year a pair returned to Knepp, the same pair, to a different nesting site, but they built a new nest. Again, they laid 3 eggs, and after 33 days of incubating and guarding those eggs, they hatched the very first white stork chicks to be naturally born in the UK for over 600 years. Now this is an absolutely momentous occasion, a huge milestone for all the people working on that reintroduction program, but also all the people following it. So lots and lots of excitement. So what happened next? Well, at the moment this year, there are 3 separate nests on the Knepp estate. So an amazing progress from last year. Now, white storks are interesting birds in that they stagger their egg laying in 2-day intervals, and they start incubating the eggs as they go. So the clutch hatches in 2-day intervals as well. And this is called hatching asynchrony, and it's in contrast to species that will only start incubating their eggs once all the eggs are laid. Now, this also means that the eggs that are laid further down the line are smaller, so a natural size order or hierarchy or pecking order is established. But the parents themselves, they will step in before any sibling rivalry kicks in. And a 2016 study at the University of Seville found that the larger, older chicks don't seem to try to outcompete the younger chicks for food. And in fact, the returning adults to the nest, they will wait for all the chicks to gather and form a neat circle, and only then will they start to regurgitate the food. And they'll do that in the middle of the circle with a range of food items so that the smaller chicks have bite-sized prey that they also can handle. And this is an absolutely magnificent sight and a real treat. And you can see there these birds are huge, regurgitating there for the chicks in the nest. So the parents do this up to 16 times a day, and they'll do that for 2 months. So this is a huge parenting investment. And on top of that, the species, they form really strong social bonds as well. So the adults, they show really high nest site fidelity. They'll also form strong pair bonds, but then they perform these spectacular displays, this up-down display, while they're clattering their beaks. And they do this to greet one another, but they also greet each chick as it hatches out. And even the chicks themselves will start to do this displaying behavior within a few days of hatching. And it's a primeval sound, and it's happening at Knepp Estate. And wouldn't it be amazing to have that sound ringing out across the country? So the parents are doing well, but there's still a long road ahead. There's still 6 weeks to go before these chicks are ready to start fledging. So like I said, the journey is not over yet, but we are keeping our fingers crossed, our toes crossed, everything crossed, that they are successful, because this really, really is history in the making. And of course, we will be following, we'll be keeping a very, very close eye on these absolutely spectacular birds as they re-establish themselves back in this country as breeding birds once again after 600 years. Chris and Megan, I mean, wouldn't you love to see these birds back in the New Forest?
I'd love to see them, and I can tell you, Gillian, that if I was living anywhere near Knepp, I'd have the scaffolding up on the roof at the moment, I'd be building my artificial nest platform, and I'd have one of those plastic stalks you used to get at garden centres in the 1970s up there to attract them in. Absolutely brilliant. 600 years. That's what I call good, practical conservation in action. Now, when you're a young, budding naturalist, the tools of your trade are something that you aspire to have the best of. You know, when you go pond dipping, you don't want one of those nets your parents buy in the newsagents on the way. You want a proper pond net. When you get into birding, you don't want some rough old battered binoculars your grandfather's dragged out of the cupboard that he used in the Second World War. You want state-of-the-art binoculars. What I always wanted was a proper moth trap. But they're very expensive, and I had to wait until I got my first ever paycheck as a camera assistant to buy this, my beautiful Robinson moth trap. Years of sterling service. Oh, we've enjoyed that moth trap, Beast.
We have done, but I can't believe that you spent an entire salary on what is essentially an overpriced bucket and a light bulb. I mean, come on, I've made one for myself from everything we've got at home. I've got an old bed sheet here that I put up, and you can do this at home just by pinning it on a garage. And are you ready for the action?
Yeah.
The magic.
Yeah.
A torch, you shine a light, and there you are. And it really does work. You get so many amazing moths, and you can see the contrast with that white background there, and it works a treat.
It does, and you can just pin that up on the wall at home.
It's all you need.
When the batteries run flat, go out and check your moths. All right, overpriced plastic bucket. Listen, we had the overpriced plastic bucket out last night, and we got some good moths though, didn't we?
We did. So this is one of my favourites here. This is a privet hawk moth. It's the largest of the hawk moths that we have in the UK, with a wingspan between 9 and 12 centimetres. But what you can't see there, if I can see if it will open its wings for me, that beautiful pink barring there. It is beautiful.
Pretty good, but I'm raising you this moth. Look at that. That is a goat moth. Britain's heaviest moth, if you discount migrants, and also very, very hard to see. Localised in its distribution, rarely comes to light at night, and particularly pertinent, as last week we were looking at the secretion that its caterpillar leaves on the outside of a tree, and there were hornets visiting. And I've never seen a goat moth before.
You know what? All right, that's pretty good. I'll give you that.
It's good.
It is nice. But is it as good as my favourite moth of all time? That's the question. And you know what's coming.
I do.
It's the elephant hawk moth. I mean, it's beautiful olive green and pink. And I've got a really strong affinity for this moth. It's named elephant hawk moth because when it's a caterpillar, it looks like an elephant trunk, or at least supposedly it's meant to anyway.
Yeah, and you have a strong affinity for these because you were introduced to them at a very young age. We've got an embarrassing photo of you now. Look at this.
No.
Look, there you are.
I can't believe you've done that. How did you sneak that in?
Oh, that's just like the thing is, right, but putting moths on your nose, that got you into moths. You're still
It
into
did.
moths.
But I had a birthday party, a moth trapping birthday party.
All right. Don't
was
tell everyone all the...
great fun.
Right, moving swiftly on, we've had plenty of other pictures sent in by you, people enjoying their own moths. Look at this one. This is pretty good, scarlet tiger moth, a day-flying species, very striking indeed.
There.
This one here, cream spot tiger.
Oh, it's gorgeous, isn't it? Look at that dappling there, beautiful.
And then a whole handful.
Oh, elephant hawk moth, 3 on the hand. Beat me, didn't it? I only had one. Very envious.
And then look, this one. If you ever find a moth, you can always make up your own name, and 99% of the time it's right. Look, it's emerald in colour, it's got blotches on it, it's a blotched emerald. I jest not.
And finally, we've got this one. This is a garden tiger moth. Very, very beautiful. Quite a large moth. We have 2,500 different moth species in the UK, and about 800 of these are relatively large. But in recent years, we know that those large moths have seen a 40% decline, particularly in southern England, and especially that species, the garden tiger.
Yeah, which we didn't catch any of in the last few nights.
No.
And I mean, yeah, when I was younger, running that overpriced plastic bucket when I first got it, we used to get masses of garden tigers. You hardly ever see them now.
I don't think I have, you know.
Yeah, and losing our moths could be a real problem. We typically think of bees as being the most essential pollinators in our environment. It turns out that moths are playing a really important part too.
Yeah, absolutely. When we think of moths, they're flying around, but there was one study that looked at a pond in Norfolk. Now, 45% of these moth species were found to have pollen on them that came from 47 different plant species. All had pollen, and all the plants were plants that were rarely pollinated by anything else.
Yeah. Not only that, they're also important for pollinating things that we eat. And our cameraman, Pat, has brilliantly arranged this fruit and veg demonstration
What a
here.
buffet.
All of these things are pollinated by moths. Yes, let me tell you here. So, the peaches and the nectarines, dark and light arches, common rustic, smoky wainscot and marbled minor, all species that you might find on your sheet if you put it out here. Again, the raspberries and the blackberries, similar range of species, but my favourite is this one, the radish. What do you reckon pollinates the radish?
Well, I don't know, I'd go with elephant hawk, my favourite.
It is elephant hawk and also
Great.
garden tiger. So without those garden tigers, you're a radish short of a full salad.
That'd be devastating.
Absolutely devastating. And of course, the moths are not just flying around at night doing that pollinating business, they're also flying in the daytime. Here we see a burnet moth, and that's its proboscis going into the nectaria of a pyramidal orchid. And those little lumps you can see on it there are what we call pollinia. They're pollen capsules which stick to that proboscis. That means that it can't take it all the way back into its mouth, therefore it starts to dehydrate, it becomes thirstier. So it visits the flowers ever more frequently, spreading the pollen. The plant is in a way interacting with the animal to its deficit to promote its own pollination. Absolutely fantastic. Well, sadly, that's all we've got time for. If you want to stay connected to us, you can through our live nest. As you know, we've got cameras on quite a few of those, and you can watch them 24/7 by visiting the iPlayer and the BBC website.
And follow us on social media too. You can keep up to date with us on BBC Springwatch. Hannah Stitfall's live at 9 AM. We're here for Chris and Meg's Out to Lunch at 12 PM, and Hannah Stitfall will be back at 5 PM too.
And I'll be back tomorrow with some people who are lending a very helping hand to our hedgehogs.
And I'll be meeting an unexpected Cornish resident that is easily overlooked.
I'll be celebrating the fantastic work of the Roy Dennis Wildlife Foundation and the return of the white-tailed eagle to the southern coast.
And finally, I'll still be here in the tranquil Trossachs, bringing you live views of our osprey nest.
Well, there's still time this evening to get out into the garden, get a sheet off the bed, drape it over the wall, get yourself a bright torch.
And find yourself a privet hawk moth.
A privet hawk moth on the finger. Now that would brighten your day when you get up tomorrow morning, wouldn't it? If that. you can always catch up with us on social or join us at 8 o'clock tomorrow night for another Springwatch. It's a bit of a cottage industry this year, but we hope it's working for you. Good night.
Bye.
The Open University is inviting you to take part in its brand new citizen science project, OU Pollinator Watch, created to help us discover more about insect pollinators. To find out how to identify a selection of insect pollinators and share your very own observations or photos, visit bbc.co.uk/Springwatch and follow the links to the Open University.